New York City had a way of stripping people bare. The rain didn't care if you were rich or poor. It soaked you all the same, turned silk into rags and designer shoes into puddles of regret. Ava Sinclair had learned that lesson early, and on the night that changed her life forever, she wasn't thinking about lessons. She was thinking about eggs, 12 of them tumbling across wet pavement at 8th Avenue, cracking one by one like small yellow suns extinguished before their time. She'd just come from a late shift at the gallery. Not her gallery, not yet, but the one she'd been working her way up through for 3 years. Curator's assistant. The title sounded grand. The salary was not. Here, let me. He appeared from nowhere. That was what she remembered later. Not his face first, not his hands, but the fact that he simply materialized beside her, as though the rain had conjured him. He was crouching before she even registered his presence, gathering the unbroken eggs with the careful focus of a man who understood that small things mattered. 3 survivors, he said, holding them up. His voice was dry, precise, amused without being unkind. Ava looked at him properly then. He was ordinary, that was the word. Brown hair dampened flat, no umbrella, wearing a jacket that had probably been expensive 5 years ago. His shoes were scuffed. His watch, she noticed with the eye of someone who had spent years cataloging beautiful things, was a simple Seiko. Not a billionaire's watch, not even close. "Thank you," she said. "I was going to make an omelet." 3-egg omelet is actually optimal, he replied, still crouching, still handing her the eggs one by one like artifacts being transferred between curators. "The 4th egg is always hubris." She laughed. She didn't mean to. It came out of her before she could stop it, bright and genuine, and something shifted in his expression. Something she would spend 2 years trying to understand and never quite manage. His name was Ethan Cole. He did not tell her what he did. She did not ask. They ended up in a diner 3 blocks away because neither of them had anywhere better to be, and they talked for 4 hours about everything. About art, about architecture, about the way cities die and resurrect themselves, about the particular loneliness of being surrounded by millions of people and still eating dinner alone. He was brilliant. That was undeniable. He spoke about global markets the way she spoke about paintings, with a fluency that came from true love, not performance. But she didn't know about the markets then. She just knew he was brilliant and that he looked at her like she was the most interesting room he'd ever walked into. She should have asked more questions. She should have noticed the way his phone buzzed every 7 minutes and he turned it face down each time. She should have asked why a man eating diner eggs at midnight had a security detail parked across the street in a black SUV, something she only understood much later. But she didn't, because she was 28 and lonely, and he was the first person in years who had made her feel seen. She didn't know, as she walked home that night with 3 surviving eggs and his number in her phone, that Ethan Cole was worth $4.7 billion. She didn't know he was on the cover of Forbes. She didn't know he had a team of PR handlers and a carefully managed public image and a board of directors who monitored his personal life like shareholders monitored stock. She didn't know any of it. And neither, it would turn out, did he know the truth about her. They were both, in their own ways, playing strangers. And they were both, in their own ways, falling. 3 months later, he proposed in the same diner with a ring that cost more than she'd made in the last decade. A ring she would later discover was a 4.2-carat De Beers diamond that had once belonged to a Belgian duchess. He'd had it resized. He'd kept the receipt, too, folded in his breast pocket the night he proposed, in case she said no and he had to return it. She didn't say no. She said yes, and then she said, "Why here?" And Ethan Cole, billionaire, Forbes cover boy, man who had once shaken hands with 3 sitting presidents and 2 prime ministers, looked at the laminate table between them and said quietly, "Because this is where you laughed for the first time." That was the man she married. That man. The one who remembered the laugh? She would spend a long time trying to find him again. The penthouse was on the 54th floor of a building in Tribeca that had no name on the exterior. Just a brushed steel address plate and a doorman who greeted Ava with a professional smile that never reached his eyes. The apartment was 6,800 square feet. The ceilings were 14 feet. Every surface was pale marble or dark walnut or glass, and the view of the Hudson at night was so beautiful it made her chest ache. She had no key for the first 2 weeks. She had to be buzzed in. When she mentioned it, Ethan looked briefly confused, as though the concept of keys was slightly beneath his consideration. And 2 days later, a platinum card appeared on her nightstand. Not a key, but an access card. The kind that could be deactivated remotely. She noticed that. She noticed everything, because she was a curator by training. And curators were people who looked at objects and understood that their arrangement told you something about the person who placed them. The penthouse told her that someone very rich and very controlled lived here. It told her almost nothing about Ethan. There were no photographs, not a single one. No family portraits, no casual snapshots, no framed memories of any kind. The walls held art, expensive, carefully chosen art, the kind you bought for value rather than love. But nothing personal. Nothing that said, I was here. I lived here. I loved someone. She asked him about it once, standing in the hall at 2 a.m, barefoot on cold marble, in the early weeks when she still felt entitled to ask. I don't like clutter, he said, without looking up from his laptop. A photograph isn't clutter. Everything is clutter. Clutter is just attachment with a frame around it. She should have heard the warning in that sentence. She heard it now, replaying it in the hollow silences of her marriage, but then she had only thought it was philosophy, had only thought it was interesting, had only thought, here is a man I have not yet fully mapped and how thrilling that is. The first time she understood that something was genuinely, structurally wrong was the charity gala, not the gala itself, the moment before it. The way he looked at her in the doorway, the judgment in his eyes. You won't fit in, Ava. 4 words. She replayed them for weeks afterward, examining them the way she'd examine a damaged painting, searching for the original intent beneath the surface. Was it her dress? She'd worn black, elegant, simple. Was it her hair? She'd worn it natural, the tight curls she'd spent her whole adult life learning to love. Was it her voice? The slight edges of the Harlem she'd grown up in? Or was it just her? The color of her skin? The fact of her? Before we go further, if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what Ava discovers in the next chapter is going to completely change everything you think you know about this story. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Let's keep going. She didn't ask him directly. She wasn't ready for the answer. Instead, she watched. She became very good at watching. She cataloged the small cruelties. The way he shifted his phone screen away when she walked past. The way his voice changed on calls. Warmer, looser, like a man performing ease. And then hardened again when he turned back to her. The business dinners that appeared on his calendar 3 nights a week. The ones she was never invited to attend. The photographs that appeared online. Ethan at galas, at auctions, at exclusive private events. Always with the same woman hovering at the edge of the frame. Her name was Clarissa Whitmore. Ava Googled her on a Tuesday evening while Ethan was in Singapore. Clarissa was 32, blonde, the granddaughter of a railroad dynasty, a socialite whose face had appeared on the right-hand side of society pages for the last decade. She was photographed at every event Ava had been excluded from. Always beside Ethan, always in that particular way. Not quite touching, but positioned as though touching was available if desired. When Ava confronted him with the photo, the one that read Ethan Cole and rumored fiancée spotted at elite investor event, and he said, "It's for appearances." Something inside her went very quiet. Not broken. Quiet. Like a woman who has just decided something and hasn't yet told anyone what. What Ethan Cole never knew, what he had never bothered to find out, was that Ava Sinclair was not her real name. Her full name was Ava Sinclair Osei. Her mother, Dr. Adaze Osei, was a Nigerian-British investment banker who had restructured the debt portfolios of 3 African nations before she was 45. Her father, James Sinclair, was the founder and chairman of Sinclair Global Partners, a private equity firm managing assets north of $40 billion, and one of the 12 wealthiest Black men in the United States. Ava had walked away from all of it at 25. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a manifesto, but quietly, the way she did most significant things. She'd taken a job at the gallery under her hyphenated name, shortened to Sinclair, rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, and spent 3 years learning whether she was a person or simply a product of her parents' fortune. She was a person. She had determined this conclusively. She had also determined, in those 3 years, that she was smarter than almost everyone gave her credit for and more patient than anyone imagined, and that she had inherited from her mother's side a particular talent for understanding the architecture of corporations, the load-bearing walls, the structural weaknesses, the places where one well-placed pressure could bring an entire edifice down. She had never intended to use that talent on Ethan. But the night she heard him on the phone, "I can't let them see her. It's temporary. I'll fix it." Something shifted in the geography of her. The woman who had been patient, who had been quiet, who had been waiting for him to choose her. That woman stepped back, and the woman she'd been born as stepped forward. Ava called her father the next morning. James Sinclair answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring for Ava. He had not heard from her in 8 months. She had been careful about contact, careful about anything that might expose who she was before she was ready. But he answered without accusation, without recrimination, with only 2 words. "Tell me." She told him everything. The marriage, the hiding, the phone call. The woman called Clarissa being positioned as a public partner while his actual wife lived as a ghost in a penthouse. There was a pause on the line. Her father had a way of pausing that was not silence. It was calculation, rapid and precise, the same pause he used in boardrooms. "What do you want to do?" he said finally. "I want to understand the company first," Ava said. "Then I'll decide." Another pause. Then, with a warmth that startled her even now, "I taught you well." "You did," she agreed. "Send me the research team." Over the following 3 weeks, while Ethan attended galas with Clarissa and came home smelling of champagne and careful distance, Ava worked. She worked the way she had been raised to work, systematically, exhaustively, without ego or sentiment. She absorbed Cole Enterprises like a language, understanding its grammar, its idioms, its contradictions. What she found was not what she expected. Cole Enterprises was bleeding, not visibly. The public filings were immaculate, the stock price stable, the annual reports gleaming with careful language. But beneath the surface, the company was in serious trouble. 3 of its key subsidiaries were leveraged to the point of fragility. A hostile takeover attempt had been quietly repelled 6 months earlier through a maneuver that was technically legal, but had left vulnerabilities in the ownership structure that any competent financial analyst would see. More importantly, 31% of Cole Enterprises stock was held by a single anonymous entity through a Luxembourg-based shell company. It took Ava's team 4 days to trace it. The shell company resolved to a Cayman Islands trust. The trust resolved to a private equity holding vehicle. The vehicle resolved ultimately to Sinclair Global Partners. Her father owned nearly a third of her husband's company. He had owned it for years. He had never mentioned it. Ava sat in the Brooklyn apartment she'd never given up. She'd kept paying rent all through the marriage, a precaution she hadn't consciously understood until this moment. And she looked at that document for a long time. Then she picked up the phone again. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk about your Luxembourg position." Another pause. Longer this time. "I wondered," James Sinclair said quietly, "when you'd get there." What her father told her next demolished everything she thought she understood about the last 3 years. James Sinclair had been watching Ethan Cole for 6 years, not as a hostile, as an investor. Cole Enterprises had a genuinely brilliant core business, a logistics technology platform that was, structurally, a decade ahead of its competitors. James had taken the Luxembourg position quietly, building it over 4 years, never intending to deploy it. It was insurance. The kind of position powerful men kept in portfolios they hoped never to activate. But that was not the full story. Ethan Cole approached me. Her father said, 14 months ago, before you were married. The room tilted slightly. He came to my office in Dubai. James continued, his voice careful and precise in the way it got when he was delivering damage. He said he was looking for a strategic partner. He knew about the Luxembourg position. I'm still not sure how. He wanted to discuss terms. What kind of terms? A merger. Cole Enterprises and a subset of Sinclair Global's portfolio companies. He had a vision for it. Genuinely impressive, I'll say that for him. He was smart, and he was prepared, and he presented a compelling case. Dad? Ava's voice was very flat. When did he find out who I was? Silence. When? I showed him a photograph, James said. Of the family. It was on my desk. He asked about it. A pause. He recognized you. He said he'd met you. He seemed surprised. Then he seemed... Another pause. Interested. The implications landed one by one, like those eggs hitting wet pavement. Ethan had known who she was when he proposed. He had known who her father was. He had known about the Luxembourg position. And he had married her in secret, kept her hidden, kept her isolated. Not because he was ashamed of her, or not only because of that, but because a visible marriage to James Sinclair's daughter would have exposed the nature of their connection to his board, his investors, his rival shareholders who were already suspicious of the Luxembourg position. She was not just a ghost. She was a liability he was managing. He used me, Ava said quietly. I believe, her father said carefully, that it may have started that way. But I've watched people perform love, and I've watched people feel it, and I'm not certain. It doesn't matter, Ava said. It doesn't matter anymore. She was right. It didn't matter. Because what mattered now was the 31% position in Luxembourg, and the particular vulnerabilities she'd found in Cole Enterprises' ownership structure, and the fact that Ethan Cole, her hidden husband, her strategic secret, had never, in all his careful brilliance, thought to look carefully at the woman he'd locked away in a penthouse. I want to acquire him, Ava said. I want to use the Luxembourg position as the foundation and acquire a controlling stake. Her father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, she could hear the complicated pride in his voice, the pride of a man who had built an empire and was watching his daughter calculate the terms of her own. You'll need another 42% to reach a majority, he said. I know. I have a plan. Ava. His voice softened. Are you sure this is what you want? Because once you walk into that boardroom... I know, she said. I know what I'm starting. You can't unhappen it. I know. She looked out the window of her Brooklyn apartment at the flat gray sky over the rooftops. He had 2 years, Dad. 2 years to choose differently. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. The acquisition took 11 weeks. Ava moved through the financial world the way she moved through a gallery. Quietly. Precisely. Stopping to examine each piece with the patience of someone who understood that haste destroyed more value than it created. The first obstacle was Ethan's CFO, a man named Gareth Price who had spent 20 years building Cole Enterprises' defensive structures and knew every vulnerability in the ownership architecture. He was brilliant and loyal and very hard to move around. Ava didn't move around him. She hired him. She flew to London where Price was attending a conference and met him for coffee in the hotel lobby, and she laid her research on the table. All of it, including the analysis he himself had written but never published, the internal memo that detailed exactly how exposed Cole Enterprises was to a hostile acquisition if the Luxembourg position were ever activated against the company, rather than for it. Price read his own words for a long time. Then he looked at her. Who are you? He said. I'm Ethan Cole's wife, she said. The one he's been hiding. The silence that followed was very long and very eloquent. He hid you, Price said finally, not quite a question. For 2 years. Price looked back at the document. He was a man who had devoted 2 decades to a company and a man who had never been valued the way he should have been. Ava had done her research, and something in his face shifted into a decision. What do you need? He said. A list of disaffected shareholders, she said. People who would consider a change of control if the terms were right. He handed her his business card. Give me 48 hours. The list had 9 names on it. Ava spent 5 weeks meeting them, one by one in cities that spanned 3 continents. She was methodical and honest and deeply persuasive because she was presenting something rare, a legitimate vision for a company that had been slowly strangled by its CEO's ego and insecurity, combined with the financial firepower of Sinclair Global and the credibility of a woman who had spent 3 years in a gallery learning exactly what things were worth. 8 of the 9 shareholders agreed to tender their shares. The 9th, a Hong Kong investor named Marcus Lau, who controlled 7.3% of the company, said no. Then he asked who she was, and when she told him, his no became perhaps. And then, after a 40-minute conversation about the logistics platform's untapped potential in Southeast Asian markets, his perhaps became yes. On the morning of the board meeting, Ava owned 72.4% of Coal Enterprises. She dressed carefully that morning. Not for drama. She had nothing to prove to mirrors. She dressed the way her mother had taught her, as though every garment was a choice and every choice was a statement. A charcoal Armani suit, perfectly fitted. Low heels, she had no interest in height as a performance. Her hair natural, her makeup precise, her only jewelry the wedding ring she had not removed. She looked in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. The woman looking back at her was composed and cold and ready. Then she took the ring off and set it on the marble vanity. She left it there when she walked out. The boardroom of Coal Enterprises occupied the entire 42nd floor of its Midtown headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Manhattan in every direction. The table was 20 feet long and made of single-piece walnut. 14 chairs. A screen at the far end displaying the company logo. Ava arrived first. She had timed it deliberately, 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled, before anyone else arrived, so she could sit at the head of the table and simply be there when they walked in. So the shock would come not from a dramatic entrance, but from the discovery that she had already taken up space, had already claimed the room, had already made herself at home in a place she now, legally and irrefutably, owned. The executives filed in one by one. The confusion was visible, rippling through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Who was she? Why was she sitting there? Why was Gareth Price standing behind her with the expression of a man who had made peace with whatever was about to happen? Ethan was the last to arrive. He stopped in the doorway. The color left his face with remarkable speed. Ava. She looked at him the way she'd learned to look at damaged things, with complete clarity and without the distortion of hope. Good morning, she said. Please sit down. What is this? His voice was quiet, controlled. She could see him managing himself in real time, the slight tightening of the jaw, the careful breath. A board meeting, she said pleasantly. You're 2 minutes late. Ava. He stepped forward. Whatever you think you're doing, I'll make this simple. She opened the folder in front of her and slid it across the 20 feet of walnut. Legal documents. Clean, current, certified. I now own 72.4% of Coal Enterprises. The acquisition was completed at 9 a.m. this morning. The room was very quiet. Ethan reached the folder. His hands, she noticed, were steady. And that surprised her. Even now, even here, he had control. He read. He read carefully, the way he did everything, and she watched his face move through disbelief and then comprehension, and then something darker. The Luxembourg position, he said quietly, was my father's, she confirmed, and is now mine. He looked up then. really looked at her. Not the performing look he'd given her throughout their marriage, the calculated warmth he deployed like a resource, but something raw and unmanaged. She saw him see her properly for the first time. Too late. "You weren't just some girl I met in the rain," he said slowly. It was not quite a question. "No," she said. "I wasn't. You knew about your father's position. You knew you could—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "Did you plan this? From the beginning?" And here was the moment she had thought about carefully, because it mattered. Not for him, but for her own record of herself. "No," she said. "I planned nothing. I walked away from my family's money because I wanted a real life. I met you in the rain and I thought you were real. I married you because I loved you." She paused. "You were the one who made it a strategy. I only responded." The silence that followed had a particular texture. The texture of a man understanding, for the first time, the full cost of what he had chosen. "Ava, effective immediately," she said, her voice returning to the tone of a board meeting. "Ethan Cole is removed as CEO of Cole Enterprises. His shares remain his. He will receive a full severance package per his contractual terms." She looked around the table. "I will be appointing an interim CEO within the week. This company has excellent bones and has been managed badly. That changes today." She nodded to the door. Two security personnel, her people arranged in advance, opened it. Ethan didn't move immediately. He stood at the far end of the table looking at her with an expression she had no word for. Not quite grief, not quite admiration. Something that combined them both and lay beyond language. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what it's worth." "It's worth very little," she said. "But I heard it." He walked out. The doors closed. The boardroom remained still for a moment. Then Gareth Price, standing at her shoulder, said quietly, "Congratulations, Miss Sinclair Osei." Ava looked at her new company through the 42nd floor windows. Manhattan spread itself below her, enormous and indifferent. Thank you, Gareth," she said. "Let's get to work." 3 months later, the story broke. Not because Ava told it. She had no interest in narratives told for sympathy, but because Clarissa Whitmore held a press conference. Clarissa, it turned out, was not what she had appeared to be. She was not Ethan's almost fiancée, or his investor-facing companion, or any of the things the society pages had implied. She was, in fact, Ethan's half-sister. His father's illegitimate daughter, raised in Connecticut in careful, funded obscurity, acknowledged privately but never publicly, because the Cole family patriarch had been the kind of man who believed that the mistakes you kept hidden were not technically mistakes at all. Clarissa had been performing the role Ethan had constructed for her. Society companion, appearance of eligible attachment. In exchange for recognition, she had been denied her entire life. She had not been told why the arrangement existed. She had not been told about Ava. When she found out, she went directly to a journalist. The resulting story was not about Ava. It was about Ethan, and about the particular architecture of cowardice. The kind that hides not just people, but entire relationships, entire genealogies, anything that complicates the clean surface of a brand. Ava read the article on a Thursday morning in her new office on the 42nd floor. Ethan's former office, which she had almost entirely refurnished, replacing the pale marble surfaces with walnut bookshelves and putting actual photographs on the walls. Her parents at their wedding, the Lagos skyline at dusk, a small informal portrait of herself at 22 standing in a gallery in Florence with paint on her hands, laughing at something out of frame. She read the article about Clarissa, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Sorrow. Not for herself. For all of them. For Clarissa, who had spent years performing a role in a play whose full script she'd never been given. For Ethan, who had built so careful a life around the avoidance of judgment that he'd dismantled every real thing inside it. Even faintly for herself. For the woman who had stood in a doorway in a black dress and been told she wouldn't fit in. There was a knock at her office door. "Come in," she said. It was not her assistant. It was Ethan, He was thinner. His jacket was good, but his posture was different. Not the unconscious authority of a man in his own kingdom, but something more careful. The posture of someone who has recently learned that ground is not always solid. She did not stand up. She set down the article. "You should have called," she said. "Your assistant would have turned me away." "Yes." A pause. "She's very good at her job." He sat down across from her, not waiting for an invitation, which she noticed, which she appreciated on some abstract level as evidence that he had not entirely collapsed into supplication. "I read about Clarissa," Ava said. "I know." "You should have told me. About all of it." "I know that too." He looked at his hands for a moment, the gesture of a man who has rehearsed a conversation many times and now finds that rehearsal inadequate. "The night I met you, in the diner, I told myself that it was just an evening, just a conversation. That there was nothing to disclose because there was nothing yet to disclose. And when there was?" He was quiet for a moment. "Fear," he said finally. "I was afraid of what it would mean. My board, my shareholders, the structure I'd spent 15 years building, all of it was predicated on a particular image. I'd made myself into an idea of a person, and I was afraid that any deviation would—" He stopped. "That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse." "No," she agreed. "It's not. I also knew," he said carefully, "that when I married you without disclosing your father's position to my board, I was creating a legal liability. I was protecting myself from that by keeping you out of my public life. Two birds." He paused. One terrible decision. Ava looked at him for a long time. The man across from her was more real than he had ever been in their marriage. Stripped of the careful performance, sitting in her office in his reduced circumstances, telling the truth with the somewhat stunned air of a man who has recently discovered that truth is less expensive than lies. "Did you love me?" she asked. Not angrily, with genuine curiosity. He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "I think I did. I think I do. I think the part of it that was real was the most real thing I've had." A pause. "But I loved it badly. I loved it like I loved everything. Strategically, protectively, as an asset to be managed rather than a person to be chosen." "Yes," she said. "You did." Silence. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. The company is yours. The decision you made it was right. I'm not contesting it." He stood. "I came because I wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. What I had and what I did with it." He looked at the photographs on the wall. The Lagos skyline. Her laughing in Florence. "You put photographs up." "Clutter," she said evenly, "is just attachment with a frame around it." He flinched, just slightly. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said. He walked to the door. Then he stopped with his hand on the frame and said without turning around, "The omelet, the 3-egg omelet. I still think about that." She said nothing. She watched him go. After he left, she sat in the quiet of her office for a long moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out a small object she had carried with her for 3 months. The wedding ring. The De Beers diamond that had belonged to a Belgian duchess. She placed it in the center of her desk and looked at it. It was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. "Mama," she said, "are you free for dinner?" The rehabilitation of Cole Enterprises, now rebranded as Osei Cole Global, took 14 months and became a case study taught in 4 business schools within 2 years of its completion. Ava appointed Marcus Lau, the Hong Kong investor who had been the last to agree, as interim CEO while she took the chairman role. A decision that confused people initially and made complete sense within 6 months, when Lau's regional expertise unlocked 3 major Southeast Asian contracts that had been languishing in Cole's pipeline for years. And the logistics platform performed exactly as designed when properly capitalized. The company's valuation increased by 34% in the first year. Gareth Price became CFO. He was, as it turned out, extraordinary in a role where his talents were properly recognized. He sent Ava flowers on the 1-year anniversary of the acquisition. Lilies, her favorite, which he had somehow found out without asking. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in April. No contest, no drama. Ethan's lawyers and Ava's lawyers met twice and agreed on everything. He kept his shares, worth considerably more than they had been when she'd taken over, his personal assets, his apartment, and the scuffed psycho watch. She kept her company and her name. Both of them signed without adding anything, without the small cruelties of last words that divorce often generated. The papers were signed and the lawyers shook hands and everyone went home. That evening, Ava went back to the gallery. Not her company's gallery, the original one, the one she'd worked in for 3 years as a curator's assistant, the one where she'd been paid barely enough and given barely enough credit, and had loved it anyway because the art was real, and the work was honest. The gallery was having an opening. Small, contemporary, the kind of event that attracted earnest young artists and people who genuinely loved painting, rather than people who loved the price of painting. She stood in the corner with a glass of wine and looked at a large canvas, abstract, furious, layered, the kind of painting that took years to make and asked you to take years to see it. "What do you think?" said a voice beside her. She turned. A woman, perhaps 30, natural hair, paint under her fingernails that she hadn't entirely managed to scrub out. The artist. "I think it took a long time," Ava said. The woman looked surprised. 7 years, she said. "On and off. How did you know?" "The patience in it," Ava said. "Some things you can't rush. You either make peace with that or you ruin the work." The artist looked at her canvas for a moment. "I almost gave up on it 4 times. But you didn't." "No." Ava smiled. The first real smile in a long time. Not the composed, controlled expression she'd worn in boardrooms and legal offices, but the unguarded kind. The kind that came out before you could stop it, bright and genuine. "Tell me about it," she said. "From the beginning." They talked for 3 hours. Outside, the city moved through its enormous, indifferent life. People fell in love and made mistakes and chose badly, and sometimes, rarely, chose exactly right. Somewhere across Manhattan, Ethan Cole was eating dinner alone in his old apartment. Smaller now, the penthouse sold to fund the settlement. Looking at walls where photographs might have been. And somewhere in a small gallery, Ava Sinclair Osei was laughing for the first time. That was the thing about real things. They came back, if you made room for them. If you cleared out the strategic distance and the managed presentations and the gilded cages and all the apparatus of lives lived for appearances, if you swept all that away, what was left was still there, still possible. She hadn't forgiven Ethan. Forgiveness was not something she owed him, not something he had earned, not something that needed to be performed for anyone's comfort. What she had done was more precise than forgiveness. She had looked at the full truth of what happened, accepted it completely, and then set it down. Not because it didn't matter, because she had other things to carry now. Her company, her name, her work, her mother's voice on the phone, the Lagos skyline photograph on her office wall. The artist beside her talking about 7 years of patience and 4 almost abandonments, and the particular discipline of making something beautiful without rushing it. These things were hers. She had chosen them, or they had chosen her, without strategy or calculation or the management of appearances. They were simply real. That was enough. That was, finally, more than enough. 3 years later, the rain came back to New York on a Tuesday night in October, or the heavy, insistent kind that turned the avenues into rivers and sent umbrellas inside out and made people question their choices. Ava was walking home from a late meeting. She had refused the car, wanting the air, when she saw the grocery bags go down. Not hers this time. A man, young, in his 20s, a student by the look of him, standing over a cascade of scattered produce on the wet pavement, looking at it with the face of someone who has had a very long day, and this is simply the final verdict. She crouched and picked up an apple. Then another. The student looked at her suit, her composed expression, her unhurried crouching in the rain, with complete bafflement. "Thank you," he managed. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. She handed him the apples. They made eye contact for a moment. Just that. A real look. One person to another, no performance, no management, no strategic positioning. Just two people in the rain. She stood up, nodded, and kept walking. Somewhere behind her, she heard him say, to no one, to the rain, to the city. "What just happened?" She smiled. She didn't look back. She had an omelet to make. 3 eggs, exactly. The fourth was always hubris. Ethan had 2 years to choose her openly. He chose appearances instead. So, let me ask you this. If you were Ava, would you have taken the company or walked away clean? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.